Okay, hello everybody. Mark Sage, Executive Director of the AI for Enterprise Alliance, or better known as the Area. And we're here again with one of our fireside chats. Our fireside chats are really speaking to the industry experts about what they're doing, how they're kind of influencing the industry, the use cases and case studies that they're working on, and their kind of experience in the enterprise XR space. And today I'm very lucky to be with Alex, a long-term kind of member at Net4. Alex, it'd be great if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Net4, please.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. So I'm Alex Taylor, CEO of Net4. We've been running for 8 years. We're a technology solutions provider. So fairly generalist term, but what we end up doing is solving the really complex problems for customers. So that's how we got into XR, because XR is a complex area with many issues around connectivity, usability, all the stuff that we're seeing with those projects. So it fits very well with our skills and capabilities.
Awesome. Well, let's dig into that a little bit more, Alex. So you can tell us about some of the kind of key use cases you at Net4 are kind of solving across industries today.
So we go back a few years. We started looking at the 5G network and how we can work with the 5G network providers. So we started looking at different ways and different environments where things would be used. And that took us into retail. So we've got a lot of interest in retail. More recently is doing video analytics inside restaurants. So that's a big current project we've got at the moment. Very, very exciting. Causes a number of different issues. That's not XR related. In the XR space, we've got some large-scale logistics and warehousing. We've got some live video streaming at sport events, and then lots of remote expert use cases for field workers and those sorts of things. So they're three of the big use cases we're seeing with XR.
Amazing. And I, one of the really interesting things I know you're very skilled at is around the kind of 5G and connectivity piece. So, the area's done a piece of research on it. We have members that are interested in that space. But from your perspective, how are you working with the 5G providers? It's all about delivering smarter, more connected solutions. Can you talk a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, so when we started, as I said, when we started with 5G, we started working with AWS and Vodafone. And I kind of expected a more mature ecosystem. And that's not what we've got. So what we're working out is where is it best to do workloads across the network? So how much workload can you do on a device? How much can you do at the edge? And whether that's the edge of the device or the edge of the network, and how much goes into the cloud? And that's where we've really focused on minimizing the strain on connectivity, because 5G is not ubiquitous. Certainly in the public, which is where we end up focusing, because XR devices live in the wild. They don't live in nice isolated conditions. If you've got a nice safe office, you don't use an XR device. In industry, you use it when you go out into the field where it's hard to connect. And so we were out in if you look on my LinkedIn, you'll see we were out in an unnamed location in the middle of nowhere, and it's literally sand everywhere. There's no mobile coverage, and we're backhauling off Starlink. And so it's keeping that connected, and then quality of service with Starlink becomes very, very difficult. So then how do you manage that and maintain that? So that's where we focused, is around separating the workloads on the 5G network and other networks. And that's been the biggest challenge for us.
Which is really interesting, and we know your example of using XR in those difficult to get to places, but the difficult connectivity places is really important, and we could definitely see one of the benefits there. But maybe can you talk a little bit about on the security side as well, because that's one of the other kind of benefits that we've talked about around 5G. Talk about on-prem and off-prem in difficult kind of areas. Maybe a mention on the security bit and the importance of that.
Yeah, of course. So On the private side, so a private 5G network, if you install that inside your factory or your warehouse, then you get a completely private network. So it's completely secure, and you can keep the workload. So everything, all of the processing can be done at the edge of that network. So nothing leaves the site. And if it's set up in the right way, then you end up with an air gap network as well, which is really useful for security, particularly things like defense. Some of the car manufacturers are very, very paranoid about data leaving, all of those trade secrets. So that gives you that real security. Harder to achieve on the public network, and we've been doing a lot of work with AWS on their wavelength environment. And we're actually working with BT at the moment around that, so that we can actually provide that security across the public network in the same way. So we can isolate the radio layer, we can isolate the cloud environment, so it's only on the 5G network and it's only accessible from the devices that we allow. And it gives you that privacy on a public network, and we can make that available on demand. We can scale on demand because, of course, you've got elastic compute from AWS. So it allows us to really size the solution for the requirements. And that's a really interesting use case. The biggest use for that at the moment is real-time video. Okay. So if you're looking at things like security, or when you've got to have video capability and you've got to guarantee that throughput, you can get a 5G slice on the public network, and that's something we're actively working on at the moment. And then you can push your workload into a secure compute environment from AWS actually on net.
Yeah, no, really interesting, and probably takes me a little bit onto my next question about kind of benefits and challenges. And I think we talked a little bit about some of the benefits, though I'd love to get your more thoughts on that. But what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in combining that kind of 5G and XR technologies? Maybe, to be honest, Alex, start with some of the benefits. You've mentioned a few, but maybe summarize those.
So the benefits are it's guaranteeing connectivity to a device that's wireless. Right. You can't walk around with an Ethernet cable plugged into an XR device. It just doesn't give you the capability you need. So it is that guaranteed throughput latency on a mobile device. Because of course, if you've got your phone, then you can hold your phone up and your brain can adjust to it. But and I'm sure you've got studies on, if you start getting latency and delays and video issues, it really is disorientating.
Oh, yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the biggest issue. You've got to get that through, and also it's time of data. So if you're trying to look at something and you've got, say, AI bringing back some detail on what you're looking at, you don't want a 4 or 5 second delay between what you're seeing and what you're trying to do. Not just because it makes you disorientated as a human, but also you might have moved on to something else and you've lost that assistance. So that latency for round trip time is vital.
Yeah, I think kind of summarize that, or maybe get your view on it. We've done a lot of research and we push in that 5G and XR, but we're not seeing, apart from some of the examples you're working on, too many examples of it, the deployment. Any ideas why?
One of the reasons is that you're not seeing the 5G integrated into these devices natively yet. Right. So in our trials, we're still relying on, I call it last mile Wi-Fi, but it's not. It's the last couple of meters. Will be a Wi-Fi connection, whether that's to a phone in your pocket, whether it's to a little MiFi device, battery powered, or whether it's to a full router. And that still gives you that uncertainty. Whereas if you've got 5G embedded on the device, you can then guarantee the throughput and latency. So from the 5G networks aren't quite ready, devices aren't quite ready, and we've got a Mexican standoff where they're looking at each other going, who's going to blink first?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is a big issue. And then maybe some of the applications that we've seen the mobile networks certainly promote are possibly not quite on the money and a little bit far-fetched. And so it's finding the real use cases. We've got one in particular we're working on. We can't say too much detail, but it is around real-time video. And our biggest issue is capacity. So it's at large stadia, and how do you guarantee the video throughput when 80, 90,000 people turn up? And we've done live trials on the network, and it just collapses.
Right.
And you lose all of your quality, and you can't get the throughput and all of the things we've just discussed. So it's finding those use cases, and hopefully we'll be able to shout about that in 6-8 months, and everyone will go, that's fantastic. But we could port it to real-time security around the stadium. So you could push into, we tend to work on the augmented reality and smart glass side rather than the heavy VR side. But you could push real-time video to security. They could then see images. They could get warnings of where incidents are likely to happen, queues are happening, or maybe someone needs attention. And you can bring that in so they know exactly where it is and they know exactly what they're going to attend. And that's something we can do now, and we're actively working with a number of partners, say, including BT on that. So they're things we're keen to look at.
That's amazing, Alex. And it is great to hear about some of the actual things that you're doing now. You know, that's what's really great. So, you know, if anybody's interested in that combination of XR and connectivity and 5G, obviously Net4 doing that, but just, you know, XR solutions themselves. I know you've got a really great team there. So Alex, I want to thank you for your insights. Look forward to catching up with you again when that kind of use case comes through, and we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Cheers. Bye-bye.